Creepypastas. Whether you hate them or tolerate them, they're one of the key cornerstones of the 2010s internet. Creepypastas were pretty bad, but I still enjoyed them for what they were. For those of you fortunate enough not to be cursed with this knowledge, creepypastas are internet horror stories that are often passed around as urban legends. You may even know a couple of these stories, such as Slender Dude and Jose the Madman. Nowadays, creepypastas are often seen as a joke, since a lot of these stories boil down to being over the top with often dumb, edgy, and immature plots, and feel like they were written by a teenager, most likely because they were written by a teenager. Despite all of that though, creepypastas still left an impact on internet culture, and some still have it alive to this day. I remember enjoying a lot of these stories during their heyday, and I still have a fondness for them, even for some of the more infamous stories. My personal favorites, however, have always been the creepypastas relating to video games. I was obsessed with gaming growing up, if you couldn't tell, and learning that there was this growing subculture of people making up telling true events about a haunted video game they once encountered. It made me an instant fan. I read them all, and by that I meant I looked up YouTubers to read the stories for me. So I kinda wanna talk about a couple of my favorite gaming creepypastas, what I like about them, and why they suck. Without further ado, let's get to the creepypastas. There needs to be a better way to say that, Jesus Christ. The Pokemon franchise, for whatever reason, had some rather dark implications for being such a kid-friendly game. Update, I wrote this before the terror leak happened, and if you saw, you know, I could not have written this at a worse time, oh my god. The first game in the series lets you know that these cute and cuddly creatures not only die, but they also come back as vengeful ghosts that haunt whoever did them wrong. There are also a lot of dark subject matters, like Team Rocket stealing and selling Pokemon in the universe equivalent of the black market, and gambling. Don't even get me started on the Pokédex entries because my god, some of those entries can be kinda wild. Naturally, this inspired many fans to write a lot of creepypastas based on the property. The franchise seems to have an abundance of these stories, but I'll only talk about one, since it's my favorite out of the bunch. Pokemon Black, not to be confused with Pokemon Black, is a rather simple story about a game collector who specializes in finding bootleg Pokemon games, which are way more common than you think. The collector goes on to talk about this mysterious black Game Boy cartridge with a Pokemon label on it, finding it in a garage sale, which just so happens to be where all the haunted stuff ends up on sale. Upon playing it, it seemed to be a regular version of Pokemon Red and Blue, with the only major difference being that the Ghost Sprite from the Pokemon Tower is now a permanent team member of your party. The Ghost Sprite was very different from a regular Pokemon, as it knew only one move, being Curse. Upon using this move during battle, the game will cut to a black screen with a sound of a distorted cry of the Pokemon knocking it out in one shot. But what really made this game stand out was that you could also use Curse on the trainers as well. This one didn't make the trainer NPC disappear from the overworld, seemingly killing them. At first, the game collector thought the game was nothing that special, but a ROM hack with a very unique gimmick, but he continued to play the game anyway. He also refrained from using the move too much, as it was extremely overpowered and completely ruined the game's balance. But then, the game suddenly takes a dark turn, as once the game collector beats the game, they are suddenly sent into the future. They are now playing as an old man, having to walk around a now completely empty Kanto, filled with tombstones of the trainers and Pokemon you use the move Curse on. All the while, the Lavender Town theme plays indefinitely, because this isn't a Pokemon creepypasta without that song being involved. You make your way back all the way to the beginning of the game, where a cutscene plays of all the trainers and Pokemon that you used Curse on. All the while, the Lavender Town theme gets more and more distorted. At the end of the cutscene, you then enter a battle, with now you having to face off with the ghost Pokemon. You try to battle it, but everything you do is ineffective. The ghost would then use the move Curse on you, cutting the game to black, and nothing. Upon rebooting the game, the collector found that his entire save file was wiped, as if nothing happened. At the end of the story, the collector says that he lost the game while moving, conveniently having no proof of such game existing in the first place. Surprise, surprise. He did, however, have one photo of the cartridge, thus concluding the story. I know this story may seem pretty tame and predictable by today's standards, since it has all the cliches that most gaming creepypastas have, but I can't help but love this story anyways because it was the first one I read, and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. Even today, I think the story mostly holds up, as the simplicity greatly benefits the story. One thing that is way too common in most gaming creepypastas is that it usually goes overboard with the horror aspects, often going for over-the-top gore and shock value. But instead, the story goes for something a lot more subtle than outright horror. Like, this is something you could legitimately find by accident. I remember finding an old Pokemon knockoff game that allowed the player to use a gun, so a ghost that one-shots everything is something that I could reasonably believe. The last-minute twist where you are now quite literally facing the consequences of your own actions adds the right amount of creepiness to the story and reminds me of that one MGS3 boss battle that I feel maybe inspired the story to begin with. I also give this creepypasta major points for the game not haunting the collector in the real world because, well, we'll get there. I think the simplicity of the story really elevates it above other creepypastas. I know it's not everyone's top pick for a Pokemon creepypasta, but it's one that I often think back fondly on and was kinda fun to revisit. Ben Drowned is everything that I love and tolerate about creepypastas. This famous story tells the tale of Jerusalem and his playthrough of a haunted Majora's Mask cartridge. The thing that was most unique about the story was that it was told through a series of forum posts on 4chan's paranormal board, which might have been a trip to anyone who encountered this when it was being posted live. One day, Jerusalem receives a free N64 from one of his friends, so he decides to go on a hunt for some games in garage sales. He hopes to find one of his childhood favorites, Majora's Mask, and as luck would have it, he just so happens to run into a shady old man who owns a single copy of Majora's Mask, with the label torn off and the words Majora cruelly written on it. Jerusalem boots up the game, and he notices that there was a previous save file already on the cartridge, named Ben. He leaves the save file as is, and starts a new one under Link. At first things go well, but Jerusalem does notice some odd graphical errors and glitches along the way. But one thing that manages to bug him is that every once in a while, the NPCs would refer to him as Ben despite being in the new save file. This annoys Jerusalem so much that he ends up erasing Ben's save file in the hopes that it would fix the bug. It did not. At some point, Jerusalem decides to perform the 4th day glitch, which causes the game to freak out even more. The effigy of Emptiness Link statue suddenly appears and begins to follow Jerusalem around the map. From here, the story only gets creepier and creepier, and rather than turning the game off, Jerusalem continues to not only play the game, but to write out everything exactly as it played out and what he was feeling at every exact moment down to the millisecond, which props to him. Eventually, he ends up in an unwinnable boss fight with the Skull Kid, and no matter what he tries to do, he only ends up dying over and over again. There's even a point where he reboots the game, and Link's lifeless body is the only thing visible, with the happy masked salesman laughing non-stop until it cuts to the now infamous line, "Met with a terrible fate, haven't we?" After a series of more posts, Jerusalem finds out that the game was being haunted by the spirit of Ben, and after playing the game more, finds out that he drowned. The story is honestly one of the all-time greats. Almost everything works, from the creepy and foreboding atmosphere to the way the story avoids most of the now common creepypasta tropes. It would have been easy for Jerusalem to go for the more cheap route and go for hyper-realistic blood and cheap jump scares, but instead it goes for a more creative route and tries to make a story as believable as possible. Some of it has aged, like how Jerusalem talks about how scared he is as he continues to play through the spookiest game ever, but even that could be forgiven since it kinda adds to the whole vibe of it. But what really made the story is the fact that there was also gameplay footage for the whole ordeal, showing that all of this really happened. It's extremely impressive footage, even for today's standards. The story really did go above and beyond, and this is just the surface of the story, as it goes for much longer. I only want to cover the first part of the story since it's the one that I'm most familiar with. But this is where I had to put a major warning, because I do think the ARG portion of this story is a bit much. I remember always losing interest once the Cleverbot subplot gets involved, and all this new stuff begins to crop out, like the Moon Children and even more deep lore. It honestly loses me. Which is a shame, since I think the story would have been amazing had it ended sooner. Maybe the revelation of the game being haunted by Ben and finding out why he drowned could have been a great climax, but nope. The story instead goes on for a very, very long time. My feelings towards the story were even more solidified once I heard the Creepcast episode where they went over the story. At first they were really into it, but the longer it went on, you can hear how tired they got of the story.
I'm not gonna lie, this is getting pretty bad. It's getting boring.
It's dragging itself out way too far.
Yeah, like there's so much excess fat to where I'm waiting for Cleverbot to come back.
Yeah, I know you are.
Cleverbot's the only thing that's gonna save this.
It really did feel like the author didn't really know where to end the story and continued to add more to it. Still, it doesn't detract from the amazing first half of the story. And even if it does go a bit overboard in the second half, it doesn't take away from the first portion that I love so much. Video game creepypastas are great. It really allows people to tell more interactive stories since it's a lot easier to convince people that certain situations happen to them over a video game rather than trying to tell people that a man with clocks for eyes is running around the neighborhood eating cats or whatever. It gets even more interactive if people decide to get even more elaborate with either posting fan games or videos of what happened to them. It really allows the storyteller to really flex their creative muscles and allow the story to go anywhere, even if they often lead nowhere. I didn't even talk about some of my other favorite stories, like Mario, the Fallout 3's Number Station, Pokemon Lost Silver, and many others. But unfortunately, more often than not, video game creepypastas didn't go for the more creative route of telling a spooky story, because when people think of a video game creepypasta, there is one particular story that clouds over everything else. This is by far the most well-known, if not the most popular creepypasta of all time, and it's quite the story to put it simply. We follow our protagonist Tom, who wants us to know that he's a huge Sonic fan. Aren't we all, Tom? But he proclaims to be Sonic's #1 fan. He's even played the original 2D games. That's how you know he's serious. He has an itching to play a new Sonic game, and luckily for him, he gets a package in the mail from his good friend Kyle. The package contains a note along with a CD with the words Sonic.exe written in black ink. The note urges Tom that he must destroy the CD and not play it under any circumstances, or else terrible things will happen. In fact, Kyle says that he might even not make it out alive. But Tom ignores all of this because he has one thing in mind, and that's that he can finally play a new Sonic game, yippee! Tom then proceeds to put the CD into his computer. And it's the original Sonic game, how fun. He's excited, but for a split second, he notices that the intro screen quickly flashes a creepy image of Sonic having hyper-realistic eyes, along with the background becoming more ominous, with the river being turned into hyper-realistic blood, as well as having a dark sky. How he managed to remember all of this from a split second is anyone's guess. Tom then talks about how this game plays completely different from the original, as you don't play as Sonic, but rather Sonic's friends, and Eggman. Which he notes is odd, but continues to play the game anyway. At first, he plays as Tails. Tom notes that the music is extremely creepy, playing what seems to be a reversed and distorted version of Green Hill Zone. As he continues through the level, he notes that random dead animals and blood is scattered all over the place. This scares Tom a lot, but not enough to turn off the game yet. He then runs into Sonic, who is looking rather ominous. He then approaches Sonic, at first having his back turned against him. Tom slowly walks up to him before Sonic turns around with hyper-realistic eyes, transporting Tails to what appears to be hell.
It is hot as hell in this funky ass, hot ass room I'm in.
Hello?
Is that the Grim Reaper?
After exploring for a bit, Sonic suddenly appears and begins to slowly chase after Tails. Tom tries to run away, but no matter how fast he goes, Sonic seems to go faster, until eventually he catches up to Tails. Tails begins to cry, which makes Tom cry, and you the reader cry. But what happens next is even worse, as Sonic suddenly appears again, cutting the game to a black screen, and Tails letting out a blood-curdling scream. Despite this super scary level, it wasn't enough to stop Tom, as he decided to continue to play the game anyway. What happens next is basically the same thing. Tom plays a new character, they find Sonic, they try to beat Sonic, they can't, a screamer happens, then the character dies. It's quite repetitive. But Tom wants to let you know how shaken to the core he is as he experiences all these terrible things happening to his favorite characters. But once he runs out of characters, the game cuts to a new screen showing all the playable characters mutilated, with the game ending with a super spooky face of Sonic with the caption saying, "I am God." If that didn't spook you enough, Tom makes it a point to say how terrifying the whole experience was. But then suddenly, a Sonic plush with hyper-realistic eyes appears in his room, seemingly killing Tom in real life. This leaves us with one burning question. Did the Sonic plush wait for Tom to write and post the entire story on the internet? And that was Sonic.exe, one of the most badly written, ridiculous, over-the-top, and edgy creepypastas of all time that I still can't help but love. This story is so dumb, and many agree since this creepypasta tries so hard to be scary that it comes off as unintentionally hilarious. It's a story so bad it's good. The story was eventually changed as a troll pasta by the community because of how little it tries to even tell a moderately decent story. But that didn't stop this juggernaut, as despite how terribly written it was, it still managed to be extremely popular even to this day. This is probably helped by the fact that Sonic is already an extremely popular character to begin with, so having a spooky plus version of him that would show up at your house struck a chord with audiences. Even I liked it when I was younger and thought it could have been real. But of course, no matter how hard we try, a magic scary Sonic plush would not come to our house to throw us around for a bit. But what I think really helped this story stick around was all the fan-made games and constant videos made on this specific creepypasta. Chances are that most people who watched the playthrough of these fan games probably didn't even know what a creepypasta was, only for them being exposed to this story and being led down this rabbit hole. While I am more familiar with the story than the fan games, I know for a fact that these games continue to get updated, with more and more tweaks being added to better fit what happened in the story, and even adding secrets to expand on the lore of Sonic.exe. Even in more recent years, Sonic.exe has made appearances in Friday Night Funkin' mods, which only boosted its character even further. There are a lot of creepypastas that many would consider to be a lot better, being outlasted by Sonic.exe, which I think is both funny and a bit tragic. But it's mostly funny. But what I think really makes the story one of the worst is that it was a story that somehow inspired the most amount of video game creepypastas. No nuanced storytelling or trying to build an atmosphere, but rather going for cheap jump scares, having hyper-realistic blood, gore, shock value, and making the story lose all sense of realism. It was the equivalent of those Lost Episode creepypastas, where everyone took the template of the cursed Lost Episode and basically did the same story over again with a different coat of paint. There were still of course great creepypastas, but most stories took the Sonic.exe route, did something like Ben Drowned or even Pokemon Ruby Black. With the overabundance of mediocre or even bad creepypastas, this ended up tainting the whole genre as a whole, as many video game creepypastas became clones of Sonic.exe, with one of the key monikers of a bad creepypasta was having .exe plastered in its title. With an oversaturation of bad creepypastas, it caused me to dislike the entire genre as a whole, as I felt many of these stories were either repeating the same beats with the reuse of shock, gore, and all the other stuff I just said earlier, or the fact that each story felt the exact same. At some point, the creepypasta genre became boring for me and I stopped caring altogether. Despite this though, I think it's fun to look back at these type of creepypastas. Even with all their glaring flaws, I still have a fondness for them, even the ones that were badly written. They were entertaining, and even creeped me out from time to time, since there is something to be said about finding some cursed game or entity being hidden beneath a game's surface. It's what made things such as Mario 64 being personalized pop the way it did, or even a short stint where everyone got obsessed with anti-piracy screens. Sure, a lot of creepypastas may suck, but it's still fun to look back at them and see that a lot of them still hold up, with the best now being remembered as some truly spooky stories to be read over by YouTubers. Even now, it's cool to see how creepypastas have seemingly inspired more internet horror trends, such as the backrooms, ARGs, and even analog horror to an extent. While creepypastas will never reach the same monumental heights that once were before, I'm still glad that they're finally over because oh my god, they suck.